One of the areas some feel Bleach to be lacking, or where it may have let the audience down, is most if not everything to do with the Fullbring arc and really just the Fullbringers in general. I myself do enjoy the Fullbring arc and what it does for the series, but this is admittedly an unpopular opinion. Dissecting the Fullbring arc alongside the group of individuals that make up its namesake to their fullest is a topic for another time, however, as I'd like to focus in on one specific aspect of the arc, being Ichigo himself. The focal point of the Fullbring arc is primarily the arduous process of attempting to regain Ichigo's Soul Reaper powers after he sacrifices them by using the final Getsuga Tensho against Aizen. This eventually would be achieved, and Ichigo then gained a Fullbring to stack on top of his returned Shinigami powers, but the major issue is we see far too little of the form before it is then succeeded by Ichigo's True Shikai in the War arc, complete with dual-wielded Zanpakuto and a Shihakusho woven with the very bones and hairs of the members of Zero Company. While Ichigo maintains this form for the rest of the series following chapter 542, his Fullbring Shinigami form actually gets less than 100 chapters worth of screen time, ultimately leading to it having less showings, less statements, and less opportunities for the audience to gauge just how strong the form truly should be in comparison to the rest of the series. Some believe Ichigo's Fullbring to possess a power that surpasses his Dangai or even Mugetsu states, and while I do have to say I disagree, that isn't necessarily something I'm going to get super in-depth about in this video, and will instead redirect you to my other videos specifically covering how the two forms stack against one another that you can watch here. But with that out of the way, let's take a look at what we're able to piece together to determine how strong Ichigo and his Fullbring Shinigami form should realistically be. Logically, we should start off by covering what exactly a Fullbring is. As described by Genjo in chapter 432, a Fullbring is the ability to draw on the souls that inhabit inanimate objects and put them to one's own uses. All things in this world have souls, not just creatures and plants. The amount of soul is small, but even telephone poles, chairs, and glass have souls. The souls of things are equipped with the power to help their users by nature. Our powers draw on that, boosting it with our own souls to be able to unleash a greater power. This description perfectly encapsulates the use of Ichigo's Fullbring, as the object he draws a soul from is his own Shinigami badge that serves as the only piece of evidence that he was ever a Soul Reaper. Though Ichigo did in fact complete his Fullbring, it wasn't long before Genjo's true nature is revealed and he steals a portion of Ichigo's power, with Rukia appearing to lend Ichigo Soul Reaper abilities once more, completing the initial plan of Ichigo mastering his Fullbring so that it may fuse with his Shinigami powers in order for him to gain a newfound strength beyond that of a Soul Reaper. Strength so remarkable that he promptly responds to Genjo's betrayal with complete annihilation. Genjo would even go on to say that if he hadn't stolen Ichigo's power beforehand, that single Getsuga Tensho he threw would indeed have killed him. Tsukishima receives the same treatment as earlier on in his initial mastered Fullbring state. Ichigo does him just as badly. Genjo and Tsukishima's brief scuffles against each other should also be taken into account, as they indicate some sort of relativity, and it's important to establish here that Ichigo is vastly superior to the villain duo, and that they are comparable to one another when we take a look at how they do against the Soul Reapers that appear in the world of the living, such as Byakuya's encounter with Tsukishima. Byakuya has always been a fairly strong character throughout most of the story, but most relevant to us now is his fight against both Yami and Kenpachi in Hueco Mundo. Though many downplay Byakuya's capabilities at this earlier point in the series and place Kenpachi far above him, Databook 3 Unmasked goes on to make some interesting remarks regarding this three-way clash specifically, stating that Byakuya and Kenpachi were more so interested in fighting each other than they were fighting with the actual enemy in Yami, ignoring him completely, or other excerpts stating that the two viewed their battle against Yami with a shared sentiment, as a complete and total bore. This adds up when taking both Byakuya and Kenpachi's character into account, where the two are very particular about their opponents and don't really value fighting those they view as beneath them, yet find value in fighting each other over fighting Yami. With this information, I believe it is impossible to deny that Byakuya is stronger than Yami, who is the Zero Espada that surpasses each of his Arrancar peers, as stated by himself alongside supplementary material like Databook 3 Unmasked. Ichigo's capacity to kill Genjo in a single Getsuga Tensho and manhandle Tsukishima the way he does while he is able to trouble Byakuya would mean that, in no uncertain terms, he easily surpasses the Espada and opponents at their level. While this may sound and is in fact impressive considering the respect that Espada like Baragon get even much later on during the events of Camp Fear on World, this is only really scratching the surface for Fullbring Ichigo, as he should be able to perform well against the Espada even before his training in the Dangai. But why do I say this? As a result of his extended fight with Ulquiorra, Ichigo's Shihakusho is extremely torn. While innocuous on the surface, this key detail serves quite a bit of importance, as Ichigo notes that his Bankai alters the shape of his Shihakusho, therefore it is likely a part of its transformation. This means that if his Shihakusho is damaged while in his Bankai, he is then nerfed and actively weaker than he would be with his full robes. This is significant once again, as Unohana states that even while in this weakened state, she and Ichigo are similar in terms of spiritual energy, meaning the Ichigo that arrives in Fake Karakura Town to fight against Gin and Aizen is actually at the level of or stronger than the likes of Unohana. I say stronger because the two are similar when his Shihakusho was torn, but he then has it repaired and uses his hollow mask to stack on top of it, likely making him a great deal stronger. Some take issue with the idea of Ichigo after their fight then being stronger than Second Resurrection Ukiura in particular, but this is most definitely the case when you consider not only our statements from Unohana, but also that Ichigo has been getting stronger the more he fights throughout Hueco Mundo. Reviewing his brief performance against Yami lends credence to this as well, as before he is thrown off by the heavier sensation of his hollow mask, Ichigo is able to react to, block, and swat away Yami's attacks. Ichigo does struggle a fair deal with Gin in the world of the living. However, still comparing to Unohana is nothing to scoff at considering how easily she repeatedly dispatched of Kenpachi in the first invasion. Some may once again discredit this with Unohana's statement saying she is stronger than everyone but Kenpachi. However, I have covered this statement at length in several videos on my channel, like my recent Shunsui vs Unohana video or my video covering the Kenpachi title, to the point where I'm almost sick of talking about it. But here I will briefly summarize and you can watch those videos for a more in-depth explanation. I personally believe this statement is solely referring to those who she has a good reason to believe are participating in the war against the Quincy, and Fullbring Ichigo falls under this category. This is apparent in the way Unohana and Shunsui approach Central 46 to train Kenpachi under the assumption that Byakuya and the others who went up to the royal palace, which includes Ichigo, may not be coming back. Byakuya also holds the opinion that Ichigo shouldn't at all be involved in the war, nor should he even be in the Soul Society to begin with, considering that he is just a human and he finds it to be a deep embarrassment to ask for his help in the fight. And similarly to Byakuya, Unohana is more so traditional and a firm believer in the Soul Society's laws, as she is shocked by Yamamoto deciding to restore Ichigo's power in the Fullbring Arc, alongside Ichigo's request to bury Ginjo in the world of the living, and she also refuses to show her subordinate Hanataro any leniency after he aids the Ryoka, which leads me to the conclusion that she would likely not believe and if anything be outright against the idea of Ichigo participating in the war. Camp for Your Own World also implies that Shunsui on some level may have been aware of Ichibei's plans to turn Ichigo into the Soul King, which he may have shared with Unohana before the two decided to approach Central 46. So while we've already established that Ichigo more than likely scales to himself before he enters the Dangai to learn the final Getsuga Tensho, which places him firmly above the likes of Espada or even much stronger characters like Unohana, we should take some time to look at the beginning of the 1000-Year Blood War arc, as it's important to note a couple things about Ichigo towards its introduction, primarily the fact that Yuha is very cautious towards him, so much in fact that he didn't want to invade the Soul Society until he could create a scenario where Ichigo has his hands full, and once notified that this scenario has been created with Kugi Opi, Yuha is pleased and declares there is no better opportunity than now to invade the Soul Society. This is in spite of the fact that the Gotei 13 are currently present in the Serite, including the Captain Commander Genryusai Yamamoto. While Yuha does allow the Roid clone to take his place against Yama, this is merely to buy time for him to speak with and attempt to convert Aizen. When the real Yuha appears against Yamamoto, he steals his Bankai and kills him with very little if not negligible difficulty. We should briefly highlight here that Yuha has been growing stronger as the war progresses due to the fact that all living things that come into contact with him return to his soul upon their demise, including both Quincy and Soul Reaper alike. Fullbring Bankai Ichigo then appears, and Yuha does ultimately best him. However, Ichigo does manage to be somewhat competitive against him, especially in the anime. While this brief standoff between proverbial father and son may not seem impressive, or if it's enough to say Ichigo compares directly to Yuha, the fact he could do anything against him in light of what we've just discussed is something to take into heavy consideration. This is again in contrast with Yamamoto's performance, where he was handled rather easily by the same, if not arguably weaker Yuha mere moments before Ichigo's arrival, with Yuha once more stating there is no better time than now to invade the Soul Society, with Ichigo held up in Hueco Mundo. This is not the only parallel between Fullbring Ichigo and Yamamoto either, as Yuha goes on to state that he is the only Quincy who has the power to control Yamamoto's Bankai, with the only other Bankai to elude the Stern Ritter's grasp being Ichigo's. Some argue that Ichigo didn't actually crush the Bankai medallion and is rather his latent hollow spiritual pressure in his Zanpakuto that disrupted the Quincy ability of stealing a Bankai, preventing it from being taken from him. But this can't be true in Ichigo's case, since Iburn himself is also hollow. The reverse also cannot be true, since none of Ichigo's latent Quincy spiritual pressure or abilities were unearthed until his fight against Quilge later in Hueco Mundo, who also notes that Ichigo in his Fullbring Bankai is significantly stronger than he is, and that his Bankai cannot be metallized. But we'll cover this more in depth in a moment. This means that not only does Ichigo perform better against Yuha than Yamamoto, but his Bankai also cannot be stolen, and the only other precedent for this in the entire series is Yama once again. This catapults Ichigo into an unheard of level of strength, as although he is undoubtedly weaker after losing his arm, Yamamoto is still considered the strongest Soul Reaper, surpassing every other captain according to the 13 Blades databook that covers the entirety of the 13 Court Guard squads. This isn't exactly far-fetched either, as when visiting the Royal Palace to undergo training under the wing of Zero Company, a healed Ichigo reflexively reacts to Tenjiro's punch and promptly fractures his hand, with Tenjiro then going on to state that he now understands why the Soul King is so fascinated with Ichigo, and being recognized by the Soul King is actually one of the prerequisites to being promoted to Zero Company. But we are reaching the end of the video, and just before we wrap this up, I'd like to talk about what some may consider to be anti-feats for this Ichigo, or things that would contradict the evidence I provided so far. First is something not necessarily egregious, but is still worth a brief mention, and that's Jugram shattering Ichigo's Zanpakuto. This looks bad to a certain extent, since Jugram is very clearly afraid of Yamamoto as well as his Bankai, then proceeds to completely snap Ichigo's without much trouble. It's important to note Ichigo's mental state in this moment, however, as not only is he still very much upset about the destruction of the Serite and the murder of the Soul Reapers who he considers his friends and swears to protect, but Yuha just got done trolling Ichigo about his heritage and his mother, who is essentially Ichigo's Uncle Ben figure that serves as a core motivation for the things he does throughout the series, meaning that Ichigo's mindset here is very shaken up, angry, or even vulnerable to a certain degree, and he would naturally be weakened as a result of these emotions on top of the injuries from fighting Yuha. I do believe Jugram deserves his own video in the near future, so I won't say much else, but for now it's completely fair to acknowledge that Jugram isn't exactly a weak character either by any stretch of the imagination. We should also talk about Ichigo being acknowledged as a special threat not for his strength, but rather his potential, and Kenpachi instead being acknowledged for his strength making him a threat. Holding Ichigo to task for not being a special threat for his strength means we would have to do the same for Aizen or Ichibei, who I'm sure everyone agrees are certainly stronger than First Invasion Kenpachi. It's important to note that these special threats are each chosen based on individual aspects unique to themselves. A different way to look at this is that Ichigo may instead be recognized for his potential, since he is already as strong as he is in his Fullbring Shinigami form, but he then has the potential to grow even stronger than this, making his innate potential the reason why he is a threat, and we even see this exact thing happen in the manga. The fact that Ichigo struggled at all against Quilgi Opie may call this into question as well, but there is context to justify Ichigo's performance, being the fact that he is trying to study and interrogate Quilgi in order to decipher any information about who he is or what his motivations are for wanting to steal his Bankai, just as he had done with Iburn prior. In spite of this, Ichigo and Shikai catches Quilgi's holy arrows with his bare hands, and even after Quilgi makes note of his orders to kill Ichigo, he easily manhandles the growing stronger Quincy captain with the use of his Bankai, to the point even Urahara, someone who goes on to do battle against Royal Guard level opponents later, remarks that this isn't exactly a fight he can step in on, and he could only fatally wound Quilgi after Ichigo causes his Reishi to crumble. Just to recap, and I guess what I would say if someone directly asked me how strong this Ichigo is, Fullbring Shinigami Ichigo at the very least shouldn't have lost any of his previous power before entering the Dangai to train with his father, and this is already an insane establishing point since Ichigo, as he appears in Fake Karakura Town, would easily demolish the likes of each and every Espada. This is consistent when taking taking a look at the one-sided battle between Ichigo and Genjo upon the return of his power. Genjo, who should compare fairly to his partner Tsukishima, that troubles a stronger Byakuya Kuchiki than the one that took Yami down. Some once again question Byakuya's involvement in Yami's defeat. However, Databook 3 clearly states that the captain duo both found the Zero Espada to be a bore. Ichigo places even higher, comparing to a captain at Unohana's level, as she directly places his spirit energy in the same weight class as her own, and all while Ichigo is nerfed by having a damaged Hakusho without the use of his hollow mask either. The Fullbringer Shinigami then has arguments that place him at the level of the esteemed Captain Commander, as not only does he perform better against an arguably more powerful Yuha than Yamamoto does, but the Quincy King believes there is no greater time to invade the Soul Society than while Ichigo has his hands full with Quilge. It is possible that Yuha was worried of a simultaneous assault from Yamamoto and Ichigo, however the ease with which Yuha just handled the former leads me to believe this isn't the case, with Yuha additionally mocking Yamamoto for not being one of the 5 war potentials, which Ichigo is. It's pretty clear to see that even at its early stages, Fullbring Ichigo is still easily one of the top tiers of the war arc, with bare minimum interpretations likely contending with the Schutzstaffel or captains that sit towards the higher end just shy of the Captain General. However, in all honesty, Fullbring Ichigo just has way too many statements and implications placing him at that level to simply ignore, and it's somewhat apparent that the narrative supports this with the language used to describe this form, saying Ichigo will gain new power or powers that go beyond that of a Soul Reaper, sounding more so akin to something like transcendence. But that's about all I really have for you today in regards to the topic. I feel I say this every video, but this is again truly a discussion I wanted to have on my channel for quite some time, as many are looking to be educated on what Fullbring Shinigami Ichigo is actually capable of, beyond the typical comparisons to his Dangai state, which as I mentioned prior, I have a video pertaining to the Fullbring versus Dangai Ichigo debate that you can watch here, along with other videos that I have here on my channel about Bleach and a variety of topics in general. I plan to make many more videos in the future, so subscribe for free to be notified of what I get up to in the future, such as when I upload or stream. Like this video to support both the channel and myself, as well as let me know that this is the type of content you want to see. Comment down below if I missed anything or with any suggestions you might have for the future. Thank you all for watching and have a great rest of your day.